All right, welcome back to the Pure Playbook. I'm Dr. Dustin Bosson here with Dr. Nate Merhaut. We're excited to bring another episode. Here we go. More information for student athletes and their parents trying to keep up. We're going to be talking today about the top athlete injuries that, by research, are going on today and really over the past 5-10 years or so. So we're going to be going over that. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Let us know if you have any questions. Leave a couple comments underneath. And as we dive in, the biggest thing we are going to start talking. I mean, if we haven't talked about our mission enough, but protecting and building student athletes better is what we do. Okay. So we're being on the front end of all of these injuries. We don't want to be in the reactive care space. We're very good with that. However, even after getting off the phone with Wash U Ortho today, and as we're starting to have those conversations and being put into doors in that scenario, we have a lot of people telling us what a lot of the community has been telling us, and the professionals are starting to catch on, is we have got to protect and build student athletes better. So with the evaluation we've created, with the content we're trying to put out, with the collaboration that we have going on together, that is the intention going forward. So if you've kept up with us so far, thank you. And this one's just going to be another one added to the list. Top injuries.
Yeah. So we've gone through just generally outlining what the pure athlete is and the 3 pillars of physical, mental, and relationships. So if you haven't listened to those podcasts, feel free. And we recommend doing that so you have an idea of where we're going with this and what our mission is, like he just said. And now we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty, some of the research, some of the numbers on what's going on with athletes nowadays, and specifically student athletes. So a lot of this data that we're going to put out is from majority middle school, high school athletes, but we'll group it in lump sum, say student athletes, because that's our target and what we're trying to see in the office and the clientele we're trying to basically cater towards with reducing the susceptibility to a lot of these injuries. So we're going to go through a list of what the most common ones are right now, and we'll get you some numbers. We'll talk about some symptoms and risks and even some preventative things, but we won't go too far in detail because a lot of these we will probably create separate episodes, just like we have a whole list going on what we're needing to talk about after we get through the main topics, and then we'll kind of break it down a little bit more and get into it.
And I'd say too, at this point, we're gonna have some shameless advertisements here. And the first one I'm going to throw out is, we talk a lot about the practice and what we do here. So the Pure Playbook is the podcast that we put on. Here's what I will say is there is another, because our practice is the Pure Athlete. So our physical practice in healthcare is the Pure Athlete. We're in Cottleville right now, looking to expand into other states across the U.S. and, maybe ideally globally. So I just want everybody to know, if you're looking for the healthcare side of things, maybe you are local. Maybe you're a doc that's looking to add this to your practice. That is what we do, is at the Pure Athlete, is the healthcare facility we do. So there's my quick shameless plug, because a lot of people have been asking. They're like, well, you talk about your practice. Is it the Pure Playbook? No, it's the Pure Athlete. This is the Pure Playbook podcast.
Yep. So let's just jump into it. And the number one sports injury that we're seeing in youth athletes is lumped into sprains and strains. And so that's muscles, tendons, ligaments that fall under that category. And 36.8 to be exact percent of high school sport injuries, student athlete injuries fall into that category. So pretty significant. One thing that we're seeing on our evaluation is that we can literally see stuff through the evaluation and say, ooh, we need to fix this now because you're more susceptible. And you wouldn't even think that the exercise or the assessment that we're doing is what actually shows the susceptibility for ankle sprains and injuries. And I'll just throw it out there, but it's literally a side plank. And that's one of the few things that we're doing, or many things that we're doing to check for that. But with lateral ankle sprains, which is the more common one that we're seeing, and with lateral ankle sprains, it's 70% of ankle sprains are lateral ankle sprains, and there's a very high reoccurrence rate with that, and that's from the Journal of Athletic Training. But the musculature on the lateral aspect of the leg is kind of what controls a lot of that when you get put into that position that could sprain or strain the soft tissue structures or soft tissue around that area. It's if those muscles can't hold, that with that quick force, then that's what's literally creating this.
I thought a side plank was for core.
Yeah. So
Dr. Nate,
we can look at core, we can look at shoulder, we can look at the one thing that a lot of people are not looking at that we are looking at is what's happening down at the ankle.
Yeah.
And we just had one yesterday, and it was like he could hold it for 15 seconds, and a lot of the failure was down at the ankle and the foot. So it's just something that we can see now and literally show and say, hey, this is something we got to work on. So let's work on it.
I'm going to plant this right here, so maybe we can bring it up later as we fly through this, but is on the one we saw yesterday, a little bit of the passion project behind it of why we want to collaborate with more people with the evaluation that we've created. So I'm just going to plug that. I'll let producer Sam kind of put her finger on her forehead.
Can I do a little passionate rant on that?
Put my finger on my forehead.
Kind of explain why we're doing what we're doing, or do you want to save that?
Let's save it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I will go off.
That's what I mean. We're gonna put our finger on our forehead, not in our eye, in our forehead, and we'll come back.
All right, so let's move on to the next number 2 on the list is concussions, and that's going to hold 21.6% of the student athlete injuries. And we also know that a lot of them go undiagnosed. So this is just high school athletes. This is the statistic that I'm going to throw out. High school athletes alone sustain an estimated 300,000 concussions annually, and that's from the CDC. So we know that a lot of them are also undiagnosed, so it's not even in that 300,000 number. So who knows what that number is of the ones that are undiagnosed.
If the CDC's putting that number out, it's got to be more. So.
Right. So, and we know that athletes won't report them, and there's always the conversation of, does a coach want to report, does an athletic trainer, and we can go down that route on when it's appropriate, and it really should be all the time, but there are times, and we know that there's a lot that kind of get pushed under the rug, and unfortunately those athletes get put back in there, and then that leaves them more susceptible to chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is something that's diagnosed after they're gone.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about the mechanism of how these happens too on a real basis. Is like, okay, lateral ankle sprains, there's no hiding that. And what are the mechanisms? We can literally show you, oh, look at this one, look at this one, look at this one. However, concussions, and we talk about this all the time, it doesn't take a blow.
You don't need a blow to the head.
Take a blast to the head. It's like, what about the repetitive? I mean, we do have an athlete in here right now that nobody can figure it out. Is she concussed? Is she not? She's showing the symptoms, but there is no evidence. There's no trauma. And it's like, this girl dives into water from a high dive over and over and over. And there is an impact there. So, that repetitive trauma can create these too, which is why it's not necessarily that they intentionally go undiagnosed in that. It's like, sometimes it's just so easy to be like, oh, I never thought of that. Like, it's so simple.
Yep. But not even the impact, like you said, there's a surface tension of the water from a diver or swimmer standpoint. But what about when they're doing flips and spins and turns and whatever the sport is, but the whiplash type of effect. And if you think about the brain as almost like a jello mold within your skull, imagine whipping your head back and forth and what's happening to your brain. And that repetitiveness of the whiplash type movement can also cause it. So that coup and counter coup is kind of what's happening in that area. But one thing that we're doing and is involved in the evaluation is a baseline concussion screening, and we think that's so important across the board.
And I'm going to encourage, we call it an evaluation, not just a screening. Yeah, because that's what most high school athletic trainers required to do is a screening of sorts where we dive in a little more. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's involved. And if that's not being done to any capacity, a lot of schools implement the impact test, which is more of a computer-based test, which is fine. It's just that usually with concussion, there's not one thing that's going to diagnose it. So if we can also assess it or have baselines that test multiple different things, then we can give better answers. Then we can guide them in the right direction if there is something that comes up.
Actually the top sport, I believe, we've got some listed here. Common sports being football, girls soccer is higher, basketball, but I believe the number one is cheerleading.
Cheerleading is one that's overlooked a lot, because of the flyers, and unfortunately a lot of those flyers get dropped in practices, and you don't necessarily see it always in games or competitions, but you have to learn one way or the other, and unfortunately a lot of that is through dropping someone, and there's a lot of trust that happens in that sport. So if we've seen a lot of cheerleaders that have experienced something like that.
Yeah.
And even sometimes that, like we were saying, goes undiagnosed or unaddressed.
We can come back and kind of go through. Let's continue to go through the list here before we really get way out, because I can see there's a couple coming up here that I know, like all of them. I mean, even these ones already. But let's see if we can't get through the ones that we have and we want to go through. Maybe we can come back,
jump back into
and touch on, what to look for, because that's the biggest thing too, is we want to start having parents enter the conversation and help them enter the conversation of, here's what to look for that they don't know you're looking for, that they don't even know they're looking for.
Yeah.
So let's see what we can do here.
So the next on the list is going to be fractures. And most people would probably think that that's going to be high on the list anyway, just because there's lots of fractures. They might be growth plate fractures. They might be other fractures, but wrist, arm, and leg fractures are the most common areas. Boys have a higher percentage, 4.2%, whereas girls are 2%. And also frequent in wrestling and softball for the female athlete. So fractures is up there. Then we're starting to get into the ACL tears, which is kind of fourth on the list, but
very, very high.
We see a lot of it just because of how impactful that injury is and what they go through, both mentally and physically. But a big keynote on that one.
And here's some of the things that I've seen in the research too. And while this has it at, let's talk percentages of what we're looking at here. Is we're at 36.8% for sprains and strains. We're at 21.6% for concussions, 3.5% for fractures. Fractures really aren't as common as you think. They're on the list. And some of the research that I have gone through, because I am super passionate about this right now with some of the athletes that we're seeing, is the ACL tears. Is I have even seen the sprains and strains be closer to the mid 40%. That includes ACL, and the ACL being the leader of that percentage.
Yes, definitely.
So of the 47.8 or something, I'll have to go find the research, see if we can't post it. But of that 47+%, the leader of the injury in student athletes right now is creeping up to be ACL tears.
Yeah, so an ACL is a ligament, so it does fall into that sprain category. But it's also notable on this list that it has its own category because of how high that percentage is. So yes, it can fall into that sprain strain category, but it does deserve its own category in itself because of 100%, because all of them that we see. But female athletes is one that we're seeing quite a few of right now, and they are 2 to 8 times more likely to sustain an ACL injury.
So let me very quick passion project on this one is, here's what you need to know about ACL tears, because it's real and it can devastate a career no matter what age you are. And bringing up that young men and women are 2 to 6 times more likely. This says 2 to 8. Well, I'm going to go with 2 to 6 times more likely. And here's where the 8 comes in. The 8 is what you need to consider is your young female student athlete who's 6 times more likely also on birth control?
Yep.
You have to look at it right now. Look at the research, look at what some of those things do, look at the intent that has, or the effect that has on soft tissues. There are 3 different kinds of birth control out there. Well, 4, if not more, but 3 or 4 major categories, right? Monophasic, biphasic, triphasic, and you need to go and look into those and see which one, if you're going to unfortunately be on it or choose to go that route for whatever reason, just know that it also increases the susceptibility that you're already 6 times more susceptible for.
Yeah, the 2 to 8 times more likely, it comes from the National Institute of Health, and they specifically say those injuries, you're 2 to 8 times more likely to suffer from an ACL injury because of biomechanical and hormonal differences. So they literally throw in the hormonal differences that you're talking about.
And while we're talking about ACLs and we're honing in on that, I don't say that to just hone in on ACLs. I'm bringing it up now because we're talking big catastrophic soft tissue tears. And we've talked about this before on another podcast. So I'm bringing it up during ACLs, but think rotator cuff, think labrums and hip and shoulder, think all of the major soft tissues across the body, Achilles. So just putting that out there now.
Yeah. Next on the list, we got overuse injuries, and that's anything from stress fractures, repetitive strain injuries, like you said, the rotator cuff, and pitchers and runners. So Achilles tendinopathies, those kind of things are what fall into that category of overuse. And it's literally just overloading the tissue and not having enough recovery. And we talk about that all the time on how important recovery is. The next one following that, which is, it can somewhat be an overuse injury. I can argue it that way. It could also fall into the fractures, but it's growth plate injuries. And so again, that has its own category because we're talking about youth sports and student athletes where the growth plates are still open. So there is that susceptibility to a growth plate injury at that age. And we want to address that, give preventative approaches, and give them certain things on what we should look for if we're thinking that might be one of the injuries that we're dealing with at the moment.
I'm typing in a couple of things here too, so keep rolling, and I'll interrupt you as I usually do. But I'm looking for one statistic that we don't have on here that'll kind of be a little bit of a surprise.
Along the same lines of that growth plate injury, I'll throw out a little statistic from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And the growth plate injuries account for 15 to 30% of all childhood fractures. So again, under the fracture category, it's up to 30% of those fractures in childhood or child years. I almost said childbearing years. Different podcast, different category.
Adolescent years.
But yeah, so then a little bit kind of overview. If we're looking at more so injured areas, so if we're talking areas, there are certain percentages we can also throw out there. In head and face injuries are the top. If we're talking about an area that's going to be injured, so at 24.2%, the head and face gets injured the most. Ankle injuries is number 2 at 17.6%, and then knee injuries, just like we said, 14.1% is in third place for if we're talking about injured areas in student athletes.
Mm-hmm. So before we jump in and we continue cruising on, that basically wraps up the list of the most common. But here's what I would like to think that most people would consider John Hopkins a very good resource for this. So Johns Hopkins medicine here is 30 million children and teens participate in organized sports, 3.5 million injuries a year. 62% of these injuries that at least they were doing the study on, 62% of injuries, you know when they occur? When they occur? Like as far as what dynamic or like where they're at.
Are you talking like puberty or?
No, I'm talking time frame. And I'll just get to it because this is a hard question to ask. I thought I was going to be savvy and ask you a question that you were going to have the answer
last
to.
10 minutes of the game.
Can I answer?
I don't know what direction you're going.
Yeah, go ahead.
Non-contact injuries?
So non-contact injuries, majority of the injuries sustained, yes, are non-contact, but it was a hard question to ask. I thought I was being savvy. They happen during practice.
There you go.
Not during the game. So you were headed there, not the last 10 minutes of the game. It was actually 62% of these, according to Johns Hopkins, is during practice.
Yeah.
And then the non-contact conversation.
So along that same conversation of in practice is also when we tend to see the overuse injuries. And the statistic I'll throw back at you from the National Athletic Trainers Association.
I play tennis research right now.
Take this one. Overuse injuries account for nearly 50% of sports injuries in youth athletes. So
well, then I'm going to take it from tennis to racquetball. Okay, we're going to switch sports here because it goes directly into the next thing we want to talk about. It's like, okay, in that same breath, prevention and recovery strategies. One of the best ones that you can do is give them a day off.
Yeah.
Literally take them somewhere where they can sit right over here at the Pure Athlete or at a facility near you where they can do, infrared red light, where they can do compression therapy, where they can do cold plunges, and not just to do it like, oh, let's just go do that today. Like make it a part of the routine. Like kids are practicing 8 days a week nowadays and 26 hours a day. It seems like they are doing something that revolves around their sport, and a day rest is not the opposite of work. So I'm going to rephrase it to rest is not the opposite of practice. It is a part. It is, you need to practice resting and recovering. So along those lines, 62 at practice. I bet we could drive that down if we just help them recover better by giving them a day off. I bet that whole percentage goes down and starts to look better in the next 10 years. But yeah.
Along those same lines, let me get a little nerdy for you. And we need like a nerdy button. Like when Dr. Nate is getting nerdy.
Yeah.
It's like
we're gonna get a neon nerd effect.
So you said rest. Rest is like you have to have rest in order to recover. So from a nervous system standpoint, let's talk about parasympathetics and sympathetics. So if you're not getting, and this will again be another podcast, but parasympathetics is the rest and digest component of that sympathetic and all that kind of stuff that we're about to get into. But if you don't have the parasympathetics with rest and digest, you can't heal.
Yeah.
So that's where the recovery, rest and recovery takes place, but also sleeping. If you're not sleeping, we'll eventually talk about sleep and how important that is, but you literally heal during sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain things that we teach athletes in the office to automatically kick them into the parasympathetic mode.
Yep.
And so many of them are on that fight or flight, always on the go, always stressed out, whether it's school, their sport, relationships, all that kind of stuff. So if we're not getting into that parasympathetic mode, we can't heal. And if we can't heal, then we deal with more overuse injuries and all these things. But from a statistics standpoint, I played tennis, you played racquetball, and I'm going to throw back some pickleball your way. But one of the things that we can also do, other than the rest and recovery aspect, is neuromuscular training.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has to do with the performance rehab that we're doing within the office, and also other things that other providers are doing with our athletes too, whether they're trainers or other physical therapists, other chiropractors that have that neuromuscular training aspect of it. But back to the ACL, we can reduce ACL injuries by 52% by just implementing neuromuscular training. There was another stat here with neuromuscular training, if I can find it real quick, with sprains and strains. So the number one, from a preventable standpoint, 50% of those sprains and strains can be prevented if we do neuromuscular training programs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from the British Journal of Sports Medicine.
Yeah. So so let me I'll fire this back at you too. Is the I'm running out of paddle sports here.
Ping pong.
Yeah, here
We're getting
quick lacrosse toss here.
Okay.
Back across the field is the most important thing, and we said this to a young student athlete. It is great when a 9-year-old comes in and goes, "I get it now. If I was not here, I played basketball on a court this weekend," and her dad was like, "Tell him what you said," and it was cool because he knew it too. And this girl goes, "I played on a basketball court. There was dust all over the court," and she's like, "I was guarding somebody, and I went to plant, and my leg slipped," and she's like, "I felt it, and I kind of almost freaked out for a second, but my body recovered and stabilized." And she's like, "I knew that what I was doing here at that time is working."
Yeah.
And I'm like, this girl's 9.
Yeah.
I was like, and what did you tell her that the most important effect, and it goes with the nervous system, with the fight or flight and the rest and digest, the parasympathetic side, one of the biggest effects that we can make on the body to instill parasympathetic function and drive down sympathetic nervous system tone is what?
The adjustment. She
Every
literally
time.
just got off the table and she was telling us about, all the exercises and stretches and performance rehab stuff that we were doing with her. And I'm like, but the one thing that is helping you the most right now?
Yeah.
And that's the adjustment.
Yeah.
So,
and that's what a lot gets lost in that. And when people talk about the performance and the recovery, and there's all kinds of these schools across the country, and everybody's trying to get into this niche market and like have more stuff and more technology and more things and more apparatuses, and they're buying all of this technology. And here I go on this rant, and they got all of these things. Let's test this and data that and all these numbers. And it's like, when's the last time you've looked at the structure? Like, when's the last time you've adjusted somebody and made an effect on structure and nervous system function? And we want to go dialing in everything with all of this technology and AI and all these things. And we have an evaluation that we utilize that, but we've started to make it very simple, because you can also dial yourself out with all of this technology and information, when it really comes down to these kids need to rest more.
Yep.
All of these injuries are happening. They need to rest more. They need to eat better, and they need to freaking get adjusted. That's it. And if you want all the tech stuff, and why we like the tech stuff is because we can speak your language. So talk about mission. Like, don't confuse mission with intention. We're not dialing up all of these apparatuses and things and trying to sell you more. Well, we can do this and do that and find this and look at all of these gadgets we have. It's like, here's what we know. We've made it super efficient, so you don't have to be here that freaking long. And we can give you all the information you need. And oh, by the way, the care is next level, and it's so simple.
Yeah.
It's so simple yet dynamic and everything that you would need. But we've said it before, even professional athletes that we've seen here, nobody's ever looked at my structure and delivered an adjustment like that.
Yeah. That is where the evaluation is important, where we're getting so much information. But it's literally what you're doing with that information.
Yeah.
We could run every single test under the sun. We could hook you up with all these sensors, force plates. You could do, hand dynamometers and all the techie stuff that you want to do with AI that's out right now. And we are doing some of that stuff. But if you don't know how to utilize that data and a lot of that is also with the x-rays that we're taking and taking a look at the structural component, because if you build a house on a poor foundation, what's going to eventually happen? It's going to break down.
You just blur them with all the numbers, like, oh man, these guys have everything.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and then you still end up going somewhere else because you still get hurt or you don't get the level of care. And it's just like, oh, so yes. Don't like, what makes you so different? Specificity and intention. And that's always been a part of the brand, I guess you could say, of our family practice and now this. So I just say that to caution everybody, don't get lost in the sauce. And, we've got a lot of things that, why ask us, why do you use this? Why do you use that? And just notice that there's a lot of gadgets out there. We've just made it so efficient to give you the data that you need and not try to blur you and wow you with numbers.
Yeah. We did. So we did throw a lot of numbers at you today, as well as we get a lot of numbers with our evaluation. But the big takeaway is that a lot of these are preventable, and they're preventable if you know what to look for, as well as if, the right evaluation is being done and that kind of thing. So
it's so cool that you had that as far as the preventative side. Like if we just do the neuromuscular education and neuromuscular education training and the things that we're already doing here, you literally drive down a lot of these injuries by 50% in the WashU doc brought that up today. He's like, oh man, because I said, what if the site of the injury, and this was on an ACL reconstruction, and I've said this before, is what if the knee is not the problem? What if the ankle of the ankle sprain? What if that's not the problem? What if it's everything else around it? And he goes, dude, you're so right. He's like, because you can drive down, and he said the same thing on the phone. You could drive it down by 50+% just by doing what you guys are doing. It's like,
yeah,
thank you.
And there's two parts to that neuromuscular. There's neuro and muscular. A lot of what you see out there is the muscular component of it. And if you don't address the neuro component of the neuromuscular, which is directly correlated to the adjustment, then you're missing a big piece of it.
We say it all the time. They're like, well, how did this happen? Like, I've been rolling it out. I've been getting massage. I've been getting cupping and doing all this stuff. And it's like, it's not a muscle problem. It's a joint problem. And that joint happens to be around the spine that affects the nervous system directly because of the nerve roots. And like, we can go into that. That needs to be a whole thing. Maybe we'll do like spinal anatomy and really explain like,
we're going in the cadaver lab again.
I go in there. Yeah. What is a subluxation defined by what it was always meant to be defined by? How does that matter? And start to educate people on that, because it's also the thing that maybe not right away, but when people go, she's doing awesome. Like she's noticing this and coordination and he's noticing this. It's like nervous system function. And so that's a key component to a lot of prevention.
Yeah. So I think we're starting to get a little off track, but we'll pull it back here now.
Dang it.
And let Sam take away her segment if she's got something for us today.
I do. We also are three people who are always on the go doing things. Y'all with your kids, me with me.
Your husband, kid?
Yeah, my child. What are some of your guys' favorite ways to rest and recover for yourselves?
Beer. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, I'm a student athlete dad now.
You sure
and
are.
It took me until like 2 years ago to realize what was really in the red Solo cup. So no, I'm just kidding. Get adjusted.
That helps for sure.
I'm a sauna guy. Love red light sauna. Love it. I can sit there and drip until I'm a piece of jerky. Like I will sit in there. You have to drag me out.
I've used a lot of different techniques, and whether that's breathing techniques, yoga, meditation, journaling, writing things down, usually a combination of different things depending on the day, depending on the situation, scenario. Sometimes just having a good old conversation with a buddy sitting across the table is a good way to do it too.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are probably the top ones.
Devotional thing. I'm trying to really get into the mindset too. And me and Jesus get along great. So, and we're getting along more and more and diving into that. I think there's something when you allow it to be, it's not so much of a learning thing for me as it is a being thing. So it's like, give me the good word and a red light sauna and I'm in. I'm good.
Mm-hmm. We'll throw it back to you, Sam, this time. What's your...
Yeah. Ooh.
We'll rifle it over there to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Just call me a clay pigeon.
Yeah. How about a cannonball?
Oh, that too.
That's not a sport.
I like... Cannonballing can be a sport. Ask the swimmers that are in here. I think walking, being in nature is definitely one way that I rest and and reset. And also reading. You can catch me anywhere with a book. It doesn't matter. Rain, snow, sleet, hail, sunshine, outside, inside. You can catch me with a book. And if I'm not reading the book, I'm listening to it while I'm walking. So.
Yep. I like riding horses.
Do you?
No, not really. We just have an intern over here.
Oh.
A little background over here. Got a local student in the building. I'm sure riding horses can be therapeutic as well for some.
There's a whole, my undergrad, they had a whole program that was equestrian therapy. So definitely.
Well, shout out to the Rudiman family. So in the racing career, David Rudiman actually builds my race chassis, and he's still in North Carolina. And his daughter is one hell of an equestrian rider.
You might want to clarify racing is not horse racing.
No, yeah. So dirt modified racing, but her daughter or his daughter prefers one horse at a time, where we like 6, 7, 8, 900
There
at a
you
time. But yeah, and then one of the gals who used to work for us, her brother, Kason Kingsbury, is in roping. He is phenomenal and coming up in the ranks NFR, and so been around a little bit.
Cool.
Sweet.
A little preview of. You have anything else?
No, I was just going to get you guys to wrap it up.
Yeah. So, preview of where we're going next week with this is we talked a lot about recovery already.
Yeah. Tell me, I need to know.
That is where we're going. Basically, what recovery methods we want to use for recovering from practices, tournaments, long weekends, competitive things like that. And once you sustain the injury, what you're doing or what you need to do to prevent it.
Sweet. All right. That's it. Shutting it down. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, let us know. Leave a comment. Like I said, follow us on the socials, the Pure Athlete. Check out thepureathlete.com. I may have been coding a whole website for the past 3 weeks. So go break that. Let me know what doesn't work, what you can't get to, what you want to see on there at thepureathlete.com. And we'll see you next time on the Pure Playbook. See ya.